about Yellen's visit. Bonnie, thank you very much for joining us. How significant do you think this trip from Janet Yellen is, coming just weeks after the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, visited China?
I think it's an important visit. It is part of a process of trying to reestablish channels of communication between the United States and China. In a run-up to what could be a meeting between our two presidents, Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, at the APEC leaders meeting in November. This is a very fragile relationship. There have been a lot of problems and friction. There has been suspension of some of the channels of communication for many months. And so this is a tenuous re-engagement.
Presumably, Janet Yellen will be looking to open up those lines of communication on economic issues and also try to convince the Chinese that moves that President Biden and his administration have taken on export controls, for example, are not meant to instigate an economic war. Do you think that will work?
Well, the Chinese are very suspicious of U.S. intentions. They have claimed that there is really no difference between decoupling and de-risking. And I think that Secretary Yellen will make an effort, just as Secretary Gina Raimondo, our Commerce Secretary, tried to explain this to her counterpart, Wang Wentao, when he visited Washington, D.C. About 6 weeks ago. We'll see whether the Chinese are convinced. The U.S. has talked about keeping small gardens with high fences, meaning that there will be limited areas of technology that we don't want to send to China because they could contribute to China's military capability to threaten the United States and our allies. The question is whether it spills over into other areas of normal trade and investment. And Secretary Yellen has been clear that she thinks that would be a bad idea.
At the same time, we saw the Chinese earlier this week move to export two key materials used in the manufacturing of semiconductors, as you know. How do you think Janet Yellen will address this?
Well, the Chinese will absolutely ask this question of what the United States is planning to block going into China, not just areas of technology, but this new executive order that is forthcoming that could limit outbound investment from the United States into China and require screening of that investment. And I think that the Chinese are trying to lay down some markers of their own. They have taken some action restricting the sale by Micron, for example, into China. But this new action that you mentioned, which is imposing export restrictions on gallium and germanium, I think that the Chinese are trying to threaten the U.S. and other countries to try to get us to limit the kind of restrictions we impose on China. But frankly, I think that this may backfire. It may, in fact, convince European countries in particular that de-risking is necessary, that they have to accelerate it, because China is willing to use its access to these raw materials as a political weapon. And that is too dangerous for countries to continue, therefore, to be too dependent on China.
So, Bonnie, do you think this measure taken by China is actually going to be used as a bargaining chip in negotiations with Janet Yellen?
Well, I think that the Chinese are just trying to put something on the table and then, yes, saying maybe both of us can step back and limit the damage to the other. But I doubt that that is going to work, because I think that the United States is doubling down on our approach to China. That is making the United States and our allies more resilient and less vulnerable to Chinese economic coercion, and limiting, as I said, China's military capability.
Janet Yellen came out publicly in favor of easing tensions with China in an address that she gave at Johns Hopkins University in April. And she added the following, quote, "We will clearly communicate to the PRC our concerns about its behavior, and we will not hesitate to defend our vital interests. Even as our targeted actions may have economic impacts, they are motivated solely by our concerns about our security and values. Our goal is not to use these tools to gain competitive economic advantage." Do you think, Bonnie, that is in line, that message is in line with the actual measures that we've seen the Biden administration take?
So far, I believe that it is in line with the measures the Biden administration has taken, which go back to October 7th of last year when the United States imposed some restrictions on the sale of semiconductors to China. So there's a lot of talk now about applying it to other areas such as quantum computing and now cloud computing and artificial intelligence. It remains to be seen how far this should go. But I want to highlight here something that's interesting to me. The United States and China are both putting security before economics. They are both really highlighting and prioritizing their security interests. The Chinese are doing the exact same thing. So this really should come as no surprise. We just have to reassure each other that this isn't going to encompass normal trade. I think that's what we want to avoid. And I think that that's what Secretary Yellen will convey to her Chinese counterparts.
Bonnie, great to have your analysis. Thank you for joining us.